Good evening, you're on the smoking section with Stephen Helfer. Welcome. I think this show's been going for about 15 years now, and we're on every week. Welcome any kind of commentary discussing tobacco and tobacco policy. And for a while I've been talking a little bit about the FDA, I think strongly requesting that American Spirit not identify their packages with truthful information that they are, that the tobacco products that they have are made with tobacco which has no additives and which is sometimes natural or organic. And it just, I can't get over the fact that the FDA is requesting they remove these identifying information which is perfectly truthful. So I emailed a woman who works for the American Legacy Foundation, I think is the title, which is an organization funded to a large degree by smokers, actually, because it's money that the tobacco companies collect from smokers and then they turn in and pass on to certain other organizations. One of them is, and they run something they call the Truth Campaign on television. And essentially this organization is propagandizing against tobacco, and to a large extent I think is vilifying tobacco companies and demonizing smokers. And there was a study published by one of its, I guess you would say, researchers, and she was, I guess, polled American Spirit consumers and asked them, did they think their smoking was better for them than smoking brands that contained additives. And I guess she basically is someone who is employed by the American Legacy Foundation, so most of the time she is really in the business, I would say, of producing data that will further the anti-smoking agenda. But I asked her if she had, or she was aware of any experimental studies or what are called epidemiological studies, population studies that would indicate one way or another whether natural additive-free cigarettes were better or worse or indifferent to people's health. And she was very kind and courteous to respond to my email. I had to try her a few times, but she did respond very nicely. And I ran this by my good friend and fellow smokers' rights advocate, Michael McFadden. And you know, when I look at her response, I think there are some problems with it. And I'm going to read it to you somewhat carefully. And she says, there is no evidence that natural tobacco is safer than unnatural tobacco. Well, there may be no evidence, but if no one has studied it, how could you expect there to be evidence? And as far as I know, all of the studies that have been done on smoking and on cigarettes have been done with tobacco which contains additives. So when she says there's no evidence, of course there's no evidence. If there's no studies, there could be no evidence. And then she said to me, well, you haven't found any evidence either way because this is an experiment that is likely to yield no results. So no one has taken the time to conduct it. Well, how does she know it is likely to produce no results? I assume no results means that if you did a study and you had a large population smoke unnatural tobacco and a large population smoke natural tobacco, there would be no difference. But she says it's likely, but how does she know it's likely if no experiment has been done? I mean, remember, all of these things are supposed to be scientific. So that means you don't make an assumption without some kind of evidence to back up that assumption. Then she goes on to say the majority of the harm from smoking comes from inhaling the smoke, whether it's natural or not. How does she know that the majority of harm comes from inhaling the smoke, whether it's natural or not? Again, she has no evidence. And the whole scientific method depends upon evidence. Then she says the additives that manufactured cigarettes contain and that most rolling tobacco contains include things that facilitate smoking, inhalation, nicotine delivery. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's so, maybe that's not so. The FDA has had control of tobacco since 2009, and there has been nothing in the way of saying this ingredient or that ingredient, if removed, would be beneficial. Now, certainly if they were putting things in it that, according to Jennifer Pearson, the woman with whom I emailed, I would think the FDA would ask or force the tobacco companies to remove them. Again, if Michael is watching tonight, maybe he would have the time to proffer an opinion. I'd be very interested in hearing it. Then she goes, while the additives might do some additional harm, the effect is so small compared to the harm of inhaling smoke that is likely undetectable. Again, all of these things are assumption based on no evidence. No, she cannot point to any study, be it experimental or non-experimental, and yet this is passing as science. And again, I'm very thankful to Jennifer Pearson for responding in such a thoughtful way to me. But again, I don't think it's very satisfactory if you're looking at this with any kind of critical thinking. She gets a Master's of Public Health from George Washington University School of Public Health, and then she got a PhD from, of all places, the Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. So, of course, if it's the Bloomberg School of Public Health, well, Michael Bloomberg is one of the most arch anti-tobacco philanthropists, if you call it that, in the country. So, well, but that doesn't make much of a difference. But still, her background in school is completely non-scientific. She had a BA in English from the University of California. But I assume at these schools of public health she did learn epidemiology, and she is qualified to do one of these studies. But again, her whole response is based on assumptions, not based on any kind of scientific evidence. And we find this over and over again in the anti-smoking movement, and yet people have great confidence if it comes, they will believe nothing if it comes from the National Security Advisor or some such person, but strangely enough, if it comes from the Surgeon General, who is also a governmental official with all kinds of possibly ulterior motives for pronouncing certain things, people tend to take that unquestionably. Of course, one problem with epidemiology is it really, which is the study of, people over long periods of time, and seeing, asking them, well, do you smoke or do you not smoke? And then looking at seeing what kind of health outcomes they have. One problem is it has it really can only point to possible causes. It can never show real causation. And I was just thinking of this in respect to something else, and that is that wealthy people are almost invariably healthier than poorer people. So, one might say, well, if we gave everybody a lot of money, would that not make everybody healthier? But of course, when you say wealthy people are healthier than poorer people, maybe it's not the wealth that is the factor. Maybe healthier people become wealthier, and that's why they're wealthy. They're not healthy because they're wealthy. They're wealthy because they're healthy. Well, we have a call tonight, and that's great. You're on the smoking section.
Hello, Stephen. Mike McFadden here.
Michael, my most loyal, other than Jim, my most loyal viewer.
How are you doing?
I am doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Finally got through the cold weather down here in Southern. But a great catch you made with that letter from the FDA lady. The idea that there are no studies, so of course there's no evidence. No.
But what do you think of Jennifer Pearson's response?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Her response was, well, there's no evidence. And you picked up on it perfectly. Of course there is no evidence because there's been no study.
Although, it would be very difficult for them to produce a study. I mean, it would take, presumably about 30 years, right?
In some ways, yes. To really know the long-term effects. However, they could easily grow their own tobacco, all naturally.
Right.
Or order a batch of all natural tobacco from American Spirit or whatever, and then analyze the smoke for the amount of carcinogens in it.
Right,
if they did that, then they would have some degree of evasion.
Right, but they know themselves, I believe, that, even though this has been done over and over again, that, the kinds of levels of carcinogens in tobacco smoke are no different than the types of carcinogens that are in coffee and a myriad of other things that we consume daily. I believe that's correct.
They're similar, but I believe there are more that are produced once you have something that is combusting. The combustion of any leaf is going to produce carcinogens. Even if you're in a McDonald's sometime and there's a little birthday party going on, and all the kids are sitting around the cake with the birthday candles, they blow them out. Well, all the little ropes in the middle of those birthday candles are organic matter, and they're combusting.
Well,
they're going to be producing carcinogens, and those carcinogens are going to go flying out around all those little kids and to everybody in the McDonald's. But we don't care about that because nobody cares about it. It's very small.
Right.
Nobody cares about the no-safe level nonsense.
But the term carcinogen is kind of misleading because, of course, it all depends on the dose, and even then, the New York Times magazine did an article, gosh, it had to be about 15 years ago on, I think that there's an acronym, possible reduced harm cigarettes or something, and the writer in the Times said that the science of smoking is very murky. And, the FDA has had since 2009, and yet there's nothing in tobacco smoke are in their ingredients that they say, well, let's remove this. This is definitely something that, do you have any idea why that is?
Basically, none of the ingredients probably contribute any major change. Maybe they may, but they haven't studied them, as you point out.
Now, what about her contention that the additives do facilitate nicotine absorption and what does she say? The additives.
Read the entire sentence again. That's important.
The additives that manufactured cigarettes contain, and she says that most rolling tobacco contains, includes things that facilitate smoking, inhalation, nicotine delivery.
Okay. They do include some of those things. However, that is just probably a very, very small percentage of what the additives are for. Most of the additives are for preservation, for holding in moisture, for controlling the burning rate, things like that. There are a few that might facilitate inhalation, and there's only one that I've heard of that influences nicotine delivery, and that's a natural additive that's already in the tobacco leaf, which is ammonia.
Right.
Simply increase that by a certain percent.
So what is your takeaway from this whole thing? I mean, do you think natural cigarettes are probably better for you or not?
I would have to say I have no idea.
No idea. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that rolling tobacco is supposed to contain these additives. A little surprised. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I'm kind of disappointed, but not that disappointed. But so where do you think this is going? I mean, do you think this is going to get some attention? I mean, why do you think American Spirit didn't fight back at all?
Well, this actually started back, did you say 2009?
Well, 2009 is when the FDA took control of tobacco.
Okay. I think back before 2009, Winston cigarettes came out with a campaign where they said that Winston had no additives.
Right.
And I guess if it was before 2009, the FDA would not have had control over it. But the government did raise a big stake. And I believe they didn't just suggest, I believe they commanded that Winston add a message specifically saying, quote unquote, no additives does not mean it's safe for cigarettes.
Of course, Winston had to put that on their package even though there's no evidence either way.
Right. And they had to put it on the package even though for years and years the anti-smokers were going crazy, telling everybody, oh my God, the cigarette companies, they're putting in all these dangerous additives that are killing people. All of a sudden, they forgot all about that and said, well, we don't know, the additives might be completely innocent. Taking them out might not help at all.
Do you, I can't find any, there was a good article in the Wall Street Journal once about that, about how the anti-smokers had been doing that for years and how American Spirit came along and they pivoted, as they say these days, the anti-smokers. I can't find any, I just don't have any documents of the anti-smoking group saying all this stuff. I'd like to see some of that. If you have it, I would be very grateful if you might email it to me.
Okay, I will try to check that out and see what I can find to email it.
They used to use the word potpourri. A potpourri of dangerous additives were added to. And of course, it really resonated with the public, because, I meet people who tell me that commercial cigarettes contain hundreds of dangerous additives.
They contain hundreds of additives. None of them specifically might be dangerous or not dangerous, you don't know. And an individual cigarette may not contain hundreds of additives. The hundreds number comes from a figure of, I think, either 499 or 599 additives that the cigarette company said they had sometimes used.
Oh, I see what you mean.
In their cigarettes.
Last question, Michael. What do you think of, someone sent me an email that Philip Morris is saying they want to get out of the cigarette business. Have you seen that?
I saw that.
You saw that?
The New Year's message, Philip Morris said, "We are giving up cigarettes."
Well, they said they would like to at some point.
Right. I don't know. Maybe they're just trying to reverse engineer the anti-smokers propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, I think Philip Morris is doing what it needs to do to survive, frankly. And I don't fault them because, when they did fight back, I think they were outsmarted and they were unable to get, any traction in terms of smokers or the public.
Very true. Well, they got vilified so heavily in the public eye that anything they said could no longer be trusted.
Do you think in any...
There's no point in saying anything because nobody tried to believe anything we say anyway.
Right. Let's see, there's, especially that 1994 business when they testified in front of Congress.
Right, yeah. We believe smoking is not addictive.
Right. Well, I mean, of course, it didn't play well, but, I think they did kind of have a point there because up until that period of time, addiction was a medical term that was used primarily for intoxicants and things that produced serious withdrawal that was not used for the kind of withdrawal that people go through with cigarettes.
Very true.
I'm a big apologist for the tobacco companies.
Just swallowed my iced tea. I was confused.
What's that?
I'm drinking a cup of iced tea, but I swallowed half of it down the wrong throat.
I can't catch you. What did you say, Michael?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Now I've gotten thrown off. Repeat the question.
It was a declarative statement, as all statements are, I guess. I said I'm an apologist for the tobacco companies. I think they've gotten a very, very bad rap that is almost entirely undeserved.
I don't think it's totally undeserved. I think they deserve it a fair amount. But in terms of those addiction statements, up until the 1980s, if you go back in the medicine journals and you look at this, there are specific journals that examine addiction problems. They pretty much poo-pooed the whole idea of calling smoking addictive.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It wasn't until two anti-smoking researchers named Henningfield and Benowitz, I believe, came out in the mid-1980s and added a brand new category to the definition of addiction so that they could then have a hook to hang their hat on in saying, well, very addictive.
Right. Well, I think they changed the definition of addiction so it would include smoking.
Right. I mean, their classic George Orwell 1984 approach where if you don't like the definition of a word, you make up a new definition for it, and then you can say, hey, this is what it is. That's really, truly what they did. If you look at the article was in 1987, the New York Times, where they came out with the new definition, and ran a big article headlining that nicotine was more addictive than heroin.
Right. And of course, you know, I mean, there really, when it comes right down to it, there's no universal definition of addiction anyway.
No, I could very easily come up with my own definition. Well, I'm a published author, actually. So I have authority in the field. I could stand up and say, under my new definition of addiction, chocolate is more addictive than heroin.
Well, the director of the Institute for Alcoholism and Drug Abuse at the CDC, I think it's, no, NIH, was at Harvard once, and I asked him, is there any substance or activity to which human beings cannot become addicted? And he said, well, at one time I would have thought there were such things, but at that point he said, he believed you could become addicted to anything.
About a week ago...
Michael, I have to say goodnight. We are going to be off the air. Thank you so much for calling, and I hope I'll see you or talk to you next week.
Kid shot his mom over video game addiction last week.
Okay, good night. And thanks for watching the smoking section, and thanks to Michael. Okay.